Hi, I'm Rob Cosman. Welcome to my shop. We, in this video, are going to review a Lie Nielsen 5.5 jack plane. Just received it, brand new in the box, right from Lie Nielsen. Stay with me. I think you're going to enjoy this. So we're going to blame this one on Jake. I talk about Lie Nielsen's occasionally, actually rather often, and he brought up the fact that we should review it because we have never done that. So the other thing I need to explain to you is my history with Lie Nielsen so that you'll understand. There's going to be some bias in here because I represented them in Canada from April of 2000 to January of 2008. And that's actually what got me involved in selling tools. I had just realized that I wasn't going to be able to survive building furniture. I have a large family. And Tom Lie Nielsen had emailed me. I had no idea who he was, out of the blue, interested or wanted to know if I'd be interested in selling his tools in Canada. Found out he was only about 3 hours drive away, so I went down there and I spent an afternoon. Was thoroughly impressed with what I saw, and that started the process. But I always appreciated the quality that Lie Nielsen was, and I think today, even still, that currently they're the best plane offered. There's a price point that a lot of people might struggle with. But what we want to do is open this up. I have not seen it. I have not seen it since it's been 2008. It's coming up on 20 years. But we'll see how they've been doing based on the performance of this plane. I'm going to open it up. We'll go through the entire process. We're going to do a little bit of comparing to the Clifton that we recently did and had a lot of good feedback from that. And I would put these both in what you might call a premium class. They're both priced about the same. And I think it'll be interesting to find out just how the Lie Nielsen stands up in that category. And as I said, I'm going to try to remove my bias, but I'm a woodworker. I absolutely love hand tool woodworking, and you can't help appreciate a really good tool, especially one that looks great. And I put more emphasis on that than I probably should, but I do this for fun. I do this for relaxation, and I just think that tools have to look good in order for them to perform. Call me crazy. Anyway, all right. So the history of Lie Nielsen. I'll interject a little bit of what I know myself. So Lie Nielsen Tool Works, it's a family-owned business. It was established in 1981, and it was based in Warren, Maine. It manufactures a range of high-quality tools, primarily for woodworking, based on traditional Stanley designs. Tom Lie Nielsen, or Thomas Lie Nielsen, is the founder. He's also the CEO of Lie Nielsen Tool Works. In the late 1970s, Tom worked for Gary Chin's company, Garrett Wade. And if you've been woodworking a long time, you'll remember Garrett Wade. It was much bigger, I think, than it is today. In 1981, Garrett Wade's supplier of an adapted Stanley number 795, which was the edge trimming block plane, Ken Weisner, was ready to leave the business. So Lie Nielsen acquired the tooling, plans, components necessary for producing that number 95. Lie Nielsen moved from New York to a farm in West Rockport, Maine, and began production of the plane in a little tiny backyard shed. The first few planes that he built were delivered to Gary Chin in autumn of 1981. And a few years later, Lie Nielsen moved into a 380 square foot workshop on the farm and started production on his second plane, which was the skew angle block plane. And in 1988, as business continued to grow, Lie Nielsen bought an 8,000 square foot building in the town of Warren, Maine, which the company still occupies today, actually. And in the early 2000s, I can't remember the exact year, but Lie Nielsen moved the entire production into a 13,000 square foot facility. And then the acquisition of Independence Tool Company in 1998 added handsaws to their product line, and that has continued to expand over the years. So I'm interested to see what Lie Nielsen has done. I know they've done something because the box is a whole lot bigger than I remember. It's got stated on the end that it is a Lie Nielsen 5.5 jack plane. Okay, so this is all new. Wow, that's a whack of cardboard. Interesting to see they do this because we would sometimes get planes back that somebody at the post office threw it and it would come right out the end, especially up here at the top. That blade would end up coming right through the box, and sometimes it would even end up breaking the rear toter handle because of how rough it was handled. So good to see that they've done that. Now, there's the actual plane. So it's no longer sitting. That's lots of good cushion. But look how Look how much cardboard they have on either end to keep that from blowing out. It's all good. Desiccant to help keep the moisture and reduce opportunity for rust out. They're still wrapping it in this paper that they've always used. These are new. Good and sturdy. A little bit of tape. This is the, what do we call that paper, Jake? VCI, Vapor Corrosion Inhibitor, which is almost magical in the way that it works, but that's what keeps rust at bay. So there's the plane. I have to give them credit. They make a beautiful looking plane. This is patterned after Stanley Bedrocks. They've just improved it, but it's a nice looking plane. All right. So blade, chip breaker in place, 7 1/4 pounds. Okay, let's get the lengths, the extremes. This one measures, if you want to know exact, it's 14 13/16. The width of the body of the plane is 2 7/8. And if you're trying to fit it into a spot, it's 5.5 inches tall, which is interesting, 5.5, but that has no correlation. The knob and handle are made out of cherry. This is referred to as the rear tote. And that's, they always did really nice woodwork. And it's a generous size. Remember, this is a 3-finger grip, so your finger is either here. I always tuck mine underneath. I'd still like to take that down a little bit lower, but that's something you're going to have to do on your own. They used a tall knob. Stanley had a shorter knob. That's okay. Actually, I don't remember that being faced that way. I thought it used to turn around the other way. No, I'm wrong. Lie Nielsen, number 5.5, USA. I want to check the sole and I want to check the sides. So I've got the lever cap in under working pressure so that you're getting an accurate reading. This is a really expensive reference block, so I'm trusting that's good and flat. And I'm using a 1/2 thou. Well, actually, let's first use a 1/2 1/2 because I think that's what their specs are. And the easiest way to do it is to pick it up like this, drop it under. If it's within tolerance, you should be able to move the plane by pulling it, and we do. So we're going to go right here ahead of the blade, right behind the blade, under the rear tote, and on the very back. So certainly within a 1/2 1/2. Let's try a 1/2 thou. Make sure I don't fold that accidentally. Oh, that's impressive. It's tugging, so I would say I would give it same here. Yeah, that was so close. I'd give it and say it's within a 1/2 thou. Really impressive. Now we're going to use the square, and this is a Starrett, very expensive square. So the tolerances on this is very high. So that's well within a 1/2 1/2. We'll do both sides. That is tight. That's tight. And we'll do the 1/2 thou. I'm actually only curious about that side because being right-handed, that's the side that I need to make contact with the shooting board. That's tight. And that's tight. That's really good. All right, let's take the lever cap off. So this is the part that they're referring to as being tight, and they do that so that it doesn't end up going out through the bottom of the box and shipping. So you're going to want to loosen this up a little bit before you actually start using it. Lever cap looks nice, we'll check that and see how flat the underside is. That's the only part that's really critical. Sometimes that caulking lever is a little bit tight, but that's not bad. Now there's a light coat of oil on there that needs to come off. Separate those pieces. That's the new style. I say new style chip breaker. They've changed back in about 2002, I think, from the old style that had the bump to a much heavier, and there's a little relief underneath. I much preferred this type. So there's your lateral adjustment lever. Has a nice little bearing on there, and that's nice and smooth, so you don't need any adjustment on that. Face of the frog is actually made out of bronze, and that's nice and clean. Hey, if you like this video, we have more. Our monthly newsletter has subscriber-only content, discounts monthly on tools, and anything we bring out that's new, subscribers get first crack at it. Click on the link below. Let's get back to work. All right, I just want to check the thickness. These were always 140 thou, 141 bonus. Chip breaker, I think, was 125, 126. If I remember correctly, these are cryogenically treated A2. I don't know whether it actually says that in the literature. I'll find out real quick. Sorry. The blade is A2, cryogenically treated tool steel hardened to a Rockwell 6062 and double tempered. Okay. Now let's take this apart. I'm actually using Lie Nielsen screwdrivers. I tape them because I find them very difficult to get a real good grip of. So we'll take the front knob off first. And that's, as I said, cherry. Nicely turned, nicely finished. Sits on there. Guess it doesn't matter. You could tighten, you could go in and flatten that a little bit, but I don't think you're going to gain anything. And they always make sure that that's sitting below the surface so you never end up getting any kind of an abrasion from it. Take this apart. Take the toe screw out. Usually that stays attached. Nice and clean, I have to admit that. Now I like to go in there and flatten that just so that it sits a little bit better. That sits flat. That wiggles a little bit, so you could go in and improve that. And I would just take a file to that and clean that up a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to loosen these frog retaining screws on the back side. There's two. The center one is the screw that you use to move the frog forward and back. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Take this out. Drop out those pins. Just clean the oil off. So that surface is nicely milled. I don't feel, you see ridges, but I don't feel any. Just curious as to how, I don't know if you can tell, but that surface has actually been milled out along the sides, so see how closely that fits. Okay, so you got a little bit of room there. I mean, it's up to you whether or not you would want it any better, but I always like the fact that there's just a little bit of movement, so when you put this in place, you can always move that slightly to line it up with the front part of the throat, just so that your blade is parallel to it. I've actually had to go in and file that sometimes to line it up perfectly, but they do a pretty good job of getting that right from the factory. So there you go, it's a bronze casting. I replaced this with my new Just-R, but this is very traditional. The lever, the lateral adjustment lever is 1, 2, 3 pieces. A little brass tab in there. That bearing moves, so it just makes it a little bit smoother. Not a huge fan of the traditional yoke, but that's, again, that's the way it was. When you put this back in place, you want to make sure that that tab fits right in that slot so that when you move that screw, it takes the yoke forward or back. There's a little mark that lines up with that pin, so when you put that down in there, you want that aiming straight back. And then when you, I always keep my finger on it as I tighten this up. These screws and those pins are both hardened, and the point of this screw fits into that cone-shaped hole. I'll just show you that real quick if I can get it out, so you understand exactly how this works in case you've never seen it before. I'll take this out. So these are, as I said, pointed. That's a long. These are pointed. They fit in that cone-shaped hole, but they're designed to meet just a little bit below center. So as you tighten the screw, the cone bears down on here, and as you tighten it, it pulls that pin down and locks this firmly in place, which allows you to make your adjustments of your throat, that opening where the shaving comes out. It allows you to open and close that without taking the blade and the chip breaker and lever cap all out. This was the main feature of the bedrocks that Stanley used to make, and they no longer do. Now I have my finger here again just so you can feel it meet, and then you know what's in place. Now I'm actually going to go in there and I'm going to clean that surface up before I do anything more with that. But I want to go through and check the underside of the lever cap, see if that's flat, because we want the pressure of that to be uniform across the back of the chip breaker. Then we're going to check the underside of the chip breaker to make sure that that's flat, because we want that to sit on the blade so that the pressure from the lever cap transferred to the chip breaker transfers uniformly across the width of the blade, so it's not pushing one corner down, which would leave plain tracks. So I'm going to go over to my stones and check this out. Now I'm just drying off the 300 grit side of this stone. Usually I have it lubricated, but the way I'm going to do this, you'll see why. Now, if you want to check this on your own plane, it's sometimes easier if you paint that just with a Sharpie. Now I've got this set up. I flipped my stone over so that I'm actually working on the, oh, that is the glass side. No, it's not. That's not a glass stone. Let me grab a glass stone. I don't want to wear on the back end of the lever cap, so I'm going to have this on the glass, and it's about the same height. I've got it in a cocked position. Put 3 fingers so you're distributing the pressure evenly. Just a little wiggle, and then have a look and see what we have. So we're making contact, not all the way across, but as long as it's not concave, meaning you're touching here and touching there. Give that a little more work. This is a one-time procedure. There, that's going all the way across. That's all we need to do. Nothing more to do with that. Now we're going to take the chip breaker. I'll take the screw out. Now this one, we need to have the back end sitting lower than the front because we have a little lip there. Now this has actually got a raised area as opposed to just a slight curve, which would leave the leading edge sitting higher than this. So I'm not sure this is going to work exactly the same, but I typically just have a plain blade over here, which seems to work out just right in terms of the height. We'll find out. I'm going to do the same thing with this one. I'm going to use this dry. I'm going to paint this. We may have to adjust the height. Typically you want to stay within 1/4 of an inch of the edge. Again, pressure, try to balance it out as evenly as you can. So I'm pushing in the middle, I'm pushing on the 2 outside corners. I actually grab the corners with my thumb, my middle finger, just so I can have something to hold on to. Stay within 1/4. If you come in too far, you're going to end up bumping in here somewhere. Just wiggle that a little bit, just enough to give us a quick read. Okay, so we took all the ink out, so that's perfect. That's nice to see. I didn't have to do anything to that. That was right out of the box. Perfect. Saves a lot of work. I shouldn't say a lot of work, but enough. Okay, now the blade comes, yeah, by some people's standards, that would be sharp enough to use. I obviously want to improve that. And I'm going to do the Charlesworth ruler trick, which saves us from having to do a whole lot of work where we used to have to go in and polish all of that back. I'm going to start with my 1000. I've got a steel rule. Don't usually leave it sitting on the ground. Now I'm going to raise that up in order for it to be able to work it. Steel rule is going to sit on the side. It's going to elevate it less than a degree. I'm going to work on the opposite side of the stone, which will be my left. I will lubricate this one. Now I'm going to take a quick look because oftentimes you may get a blade in a great condition or in a bad condition. So if you look at this one, we're making more contact over here than we are over here, but that's not a big deal. The very fact that I'm making polish, or I'm polishing all the way across, means this isn't going to take very long. What I'm doing is just getting rid of these grinding scratches and not preventing them to go all the way to the end. What you would want to avoid is a blade that had a contact point in the middle. That means it's going to be rocking like this the whole time. You really can't fix it. It could be slightly concave, which would have given me a shiny spot here and here, and that's okay too because you get two contact points and you just work until they eventually touch in the middle and you get that polished strip. That's fine. And another method, another way of finding it that is a disqualifier is if all the contact was being made on one side and it ended up being a great big triangular shape, and that just means you've got twist in the blade and it's not worth working. This one's not going to be a problem. I'll probably spend no more than a couple of minutes, and I'm going to use the entire side. If you're using any kind of a stone that wears, like a water stone or a ceramic stone, then after about 30-40 seconds of work, I would flip this around so that before I end up having to go in and reflatten the surface of the stone, I get to use both sides, and you'll just get more use out of it. This is a diamond plate that we sell that, although it does wear, not appreciably, so you don't really have to do that. But I got the blade done. This wasn't the best example, so you can see that there's a little bit of twist in it, but this is fine. The big advantage of the Charlesworth ruler trick is you don't have to go in and flatten and polish all the blade. I've seen better, I've seen worse. Actually, we did one the other day out of another brand, and it was perfectly flat out of the box. You got a nice little polished strip, same width, side to side. So that probably represented 25-30 minutes of work, but again, it's one time only, so I wouldn't change my decision or my recommendation based on that. Now this I'm going to have to go in and fix. Cannot have a blunt surface like that. Shavings will end up, as I mentioned, hitting that. If you're in tight quarters where you get your throat down tight, it's going to cause a problem. And I'm just thinking I may actually have to go in and grind that. I don't know if I can get that sharp using a secondary bevel. I'm going to try. I think I'll actually use the 300 grit side. And I'm going to go in and, just as I would sharpen a plain blade, set it down on the primary bevel, elevate it slightly, and see if we can work through to the edge with the secondary. Okay, that's done. And I can't imagine ever having to touch that again. Put that in place. Slide that up. That's maybe a little less than a 32nd of an inch. Now that screw looks different than the old ones. A little more finished. All right, that's ready to go. Now, I'm happy with everything else in here. I'm going to go in. I do want to fix this just because I'd rather have that sit nice. When I set that on there, it doesn't sit. I can wiggle it, and that's because of that. So I'll show you how I do that. Take that out of the box. Now, that represents probably 10 minutes of filing. I'm just going to blow the dust off. Now, if you have a close look at this, I'll show you what I did. So I'm making contact, at least some contact all the way around, which means it's going to sit on there nicely. Now, if that bothers you, you can always go in and just paint it with a Sharpie. It's not exactly black, but when it's covered over by the handle, you won't notice the shiny bits. So you do that a couple of times as it dries and make it even blacker. Now, final step on this, I want to take the handle and just verify that that's nice and flat. You can never tell which way the grain's running, but yeah, this is going to be easier. Okay. That sits nice and flat. Put this back together. Now, just before I try it, I just want to show you a little comparison. So I have 3 planes here. This is the 5.5 Clifton that we reviewed just recently. This is the Lie Nielsen, and this is the original Stanley Bedrock. I'm going to set that off to the side for a minute. I want to compare these. And this is not coming, I hope this isn't coming through as a bias. This is just having reviewed them. Interestingly enough, in North America, this Clifton is going to cost you more money than the Lie Nielsen. And because of shipping in the UK, the Lie Nielsen is going to cost more than the Clifton. And the difference is about the same, meaning this is just as much more expensive in the United States, North America, as this is, and vice versa. But how does it feel? Well, I can't help but say that this is so much nicer of a rear tote when I grab hold of it. When I hold onto this, it literally stays in my hand. When I grab this, it slides and just does not have the same feeling. And it's obvious when you look at it. It's there's no shape to it. They could do a better job on their rear tote by all means. And if you look at the overall fit and finish, I have to give high marks to Lie Nielsen. This is just really clunky. My complaint was that in using it, that this was awkward to reach around with these sides this high. And I don't think it gains anything by having these great big fat sides compared to these. And maybe it's just the finish too, I don't know, but that would not be my first choice. Now here's the Lie Nielsen compared to the original Stanley Bedrock. Quite a bit wider, actually. I just noticed that. Well, actually, that's right, too, because when they built the Bedrock, they never did make a 2 3/8 inch wide blade on a Bedrock. It was 2 1/8, so that's the difference in the width of the two.
2 1/4.
2 1/4, sorry. What did I say? 2 1/8, yeah. 2 1/4. This rear tote, I just love the way they feel. This is close, but this is fantastic. Unfortunately, there's not enough of these around for everybody to have one. But that's a really nice job of this plane. I only wish somebody could actually make this tote as comfortable as these guys did back then. All right, here's a piece of Port Orford cedar. This is a coniferous tree, known as a softwood. I love the smell of it. A little bit of wax to reduce the friction. I always start with the blade fully retracted, and then as I start to plane, I spin the adjuster knob till that blade starts to engage. Now I'm a little bit heavy on the right side, so I'm going to make a slight lateral adjustment by pushing the lateral adjustment lever. Actually, I don't push it. I pinch. I push with the thumb, but I pull with the index finger, which I find to get a lot more control. So you're literally pinching it like that instead of taking this and trying to shove it one way or the other. Still heavy on that side. A little more. There. A little heavy on the left. Come on. Beautiful plane. High marks to Tom Lie Nielsen. Beautiful plane. Love, worked just beautiful. Forgot how much I like these. Oh, that is fun. Too bad you weren't here to smell that Port Orford cedar because it is incredible. Now we'll try it in a piece of Eastern maple. Wouldn't expect anything less in terms of performance. Little wax. I'm going to retract the blade a little bit. A little heavy on the right. Actually, this is a piece of birch. Just realized that as the shaving was coming off. Retract it slightly. Just trying to get that blade perfectly centered. Not quite. There. Wonderful. Plane. All right, hopefully my bias didn't make this sound better than it is. It is a great plane, no doubt about it. You got to pay for it. There's cheaper alternatives if you're willing to do some work to bring them up to speed. But if you want a beautiful plane out of the box and add a few additions, this is certainly worth consideration. Way to go, Lie Nielsen. If you enjoy my method of work and like my style of teaching, click on any one of these videos to help take your woodworking to the next level. I've always said better tools make the job so much easier. If you click on the plane and chisel icon below, it'll take you to our site and introduce you to all the tools that we actually manufacture right here in our shop. It'll also give you information on our in-person and online workshops.